Thank you and welcome everyone. Welcome to our masterclass of today, which we will have the pleasure of having a masterclass with Michel Scholte that is titled Towards True Profits, Europe's Rapid Acceleration of the Digital Impact Economy. So we're really looking forward to hearing more about what really true profits and true costs mean. Our intention is that this masterclass will offer some new insights and opportunities for all of us to further understand and think about true profit, true prices. This session is explicitly related to one of the principles of the Earth Charter, Principle 7D, that highlights the importance to internalize the full environmental and social costs of goods and services in the selling, and also I think in the making of products to enable consumers, but also producers to make more visible the real costs of products, the products we consume. This session of today is part of our masterclass program of this year of 2023. Which is part of the work we do with our UNESCO chair on education for sustainable development with the Earth Charter that we do in conjunction with the University for Peace here in Costa Rica. Let me thank all of you for joining us today. And for those of you who have already some questions, I invite you to indicate your name in the chat box and where you're located and any question you may have on this topic. For instance, I have the question to Michel. I have this ongoing question in my head, which makes me think that incorporating the true cost, the environmental in the social costs in the price will make the product more expensive. And the question that often comes to my mind is, who will then take care of that extra bill of how expensive the product became? Is it customers, the consumers, or the producers? So with the help of Michael or Michel, this session will address, I hope, this question and other questions. What are the true profits? What is this transition towards the digital impact economy? How can companies and professionals proactively contribute to this transition? And how does this topic relate to ESG and the SDGs and the well-being? But of course, we want to know more about who is Michel. Let me introduce you to him. He's Dutch. He's the co-founder and executive of both True Price and Impact Institute, two different organizations that are based in the Netherlands. Michel is also founding board member of the Impact Economy Foundation, which is aimed at accelerating sustainable economy. He holds a bachelor and a master in sociology. And in the year 2000, which I think 2020, he was elected through a big competition in the Netherlands to have a ceremonial role as Minister of the New Economy in the Netherlands, which of course sounds very interesting. The Dutch are very good in creating new approaches and new things. But Michel and I, we met around 20 plus years ago in several or different Earth Charter events. Michel, can you recall me about your encounter with the Earth Charter?
Definitely. Well, first of all, it's an amazing pleasure to speak in front of you today. I cannot be more excited. It's such an honor. The Earth Charter is a really important institution for me, also on a personal level, as indeed I was exposed to the work of the Earth Charter from my, let's say, end of teens, beginning of 20s onwards, and it really inspired me to do the things I'm doing. I mean, I know it from Ruud Lubbers, who was he's former Prime Minister of the Netherlands. I would say he's the last real statesman that we had in the Netherlands. And he always, I was part of his think tank that he gathered. And he used to say that we want to bring the Dutch in the world, or the Netherlands in the world, and the world in the Netherlands. And, you know, that was something that he did for me as well. And yeah, I think Earth Charter for me addressed the need for explicit norms for kind of global governance, global citizenship. And it is actually an extension, or I would say innovation, to the United Nations human rights, which, yeah, I think is very intelligent and very smart. And I hope that this institution will be taken as a compass for a lot of the institutions that we still need to build to make sure that we stick within the planetary boundaries and assure dignity for all.
Great. Thank you, Michel. Would you like to then start your presentation? I'll give you the floor. You can share
Absolutely.
the presentation.
Yes,
and thank you for
definitely.
coming and joining us.
Yeah, obviously, and also everyone in this call, thank you so much for taking the time. Peter, I see you here as well. It's really a pleasure to, well, kind of reconnect after quite a long time. So yeah, the presentation I want to share with you today, or the idea, is the trend towards true profits. And this in particular idea of the acceleration of the European digital impact economy. And I put it a bit, and I'm sorry for that, Eurocentric, which I would say it is quite a, you know, significant force in the world. This is obviously also the context that I'm most familiar with. I obviously see parallels with other kind of trade blocks or continents in the world with regards to, you know, the institutional response to climatological challenges, biodiversity challenges, and kind of ways in which markets try to incorporate human rights. So there is some parallels, but I mainly focus on the European kind of trend with regards to true profits. Let me start with what I would like to share with you today. So first of all, the problem, external costs. Then the European digital economy acceleration. Then the solution, true prices, and another solution, true profits. And finally, discussion. 5 points, but first a brief introduction. So I'm indeed the co-founder. I'm I would say, impact entrepreneur. I try to use business as a force for good. Here you see our office. That's where I'm standing right now, in the heart of Amsterdam, in one of the most pretty shopping streets in the city. It's obviously a village compared to many of the places that you are in. But, you know, we have a 4-floor story building. We have now 85 people, and we work from Sao Paulo to Singapore for the largest financial institutions, trying to incorporate information on impact into portfolios. All the way to, you know, literally stores where we incorporate true price information in purchase contexts, put it on the counters, put it on the receipts, on the displays. So really a wide variety of applications and contexts in which we try to work. For myself, so I'm a son of a truck driver and a freelance journalist. They didn't have the education, and I would say, you know, my auntie used to say my mother did not have a nail to scratch her butt. That's kind of a saying in the Netherlands. Sorry for being so explicit to say that you don't have money. We didn't have. And I asked my mother, why are you so, you know, poor? Which was obviously not so kind of me to ask. But, you know, we had a lot of trouble with money. And I had to work quite early on to provide a little bit extra. With my papers that I used to bring to houses, to the large villas that we have in the Netherlands. And she said, well, we are not actually poor. You know, travel the world and you'll see. So I saved money for a ticket. I saw indeed that there were communities in the value chains of our products that I later found out, the products that we consume. And in Amsterdam, in fact, you have the largest cocoa harbor in the world. And the people that provide the cocoa are actually in quite some poverty. And that was something I found extremely, you know, unacceptable. And I couldn't stand the contrast. And I even felt part of this kind of neo-colonial do-goodism, that you do development cooperation on the one hand. And I was, you know, part of that. I was trying to get donations for that. And at the same time, there's trade agreements, institutions that wouldn't allow those smallholders to export, or these people to export actually chocolate bars themselves, but are mandating raw materials, which has relatively low value add. And there's actually a high tariff for end products. And therefore, it's kind of a sinister scheme to keep them poor. And I just couldn't stand that. I, well, did my fair share, but ultimately I felt like in the context of a colonial past, this is something that's unacceptable. And we need to look into the actual system itself and see how we can adjust the markets itself. And prices in particular are not neutral. Prices are actually very important information points. It's an information infrastructure, and they do not reflect the underpayment, under-earning, but also the social environmental costs. It was for me something that as part of the think tank where Earth Charter was also the founding partner of World Connectors in the context in the days that, well, I was I will say I was just intimidated by Miriam as the leader of this group back in those days. But I did see this as a very important way in which we can translate these institutional norms and these norms set out by Earth Charter and the United Nations Human Rights Charter. I saw it as a very important way. Let's change prices and make sure that they address the poverty and the externalities in a way. So that was actually my personal story. I was like, finally, we can use markets, which in itself, I'm not a market fetishist, but I think the value of markets, I think they also are limited, right? Markets are for production and consumption, not for other spheres of life necessarily. But within that, they are useful for distributing goods, having a fair distribution, having a balance between freedom of entrepreneurship, innovation, technology, and at the same time, if you have true prices, you can actually create a bandwidth in which markets can operate. And I will go into more detail with regards to that. So that was what really hit me like a meteor. And I was like, I will dedicate my life to it. That sounds dramatic, but it's the nicest thing to do, actually, to have something that you really are passionate about. So why true prices and true costs and true profits, in fact? So why is this so important? Well, ultimately, we have a problem, and that is a problem that's already well known for more than 100 years. Economists have received more than 5 Nobel Prizes for the question of externalities, how to address it, from Eleanor, I wanted to say Eleanor Roosevelt. I forgot her name. I'm so sorry. I will get back to that, Eleanor. One of the...
You mean Eleanor Roosevelt?
No, that's also a very important figure, but this was Elinor Ostrom, sorry, yeah. She was a Nobel Prize recipient for her work on commons and, how to use organization and building institutions to prevent markets to exploit the collective good, the commons, for example. But there are more. Recently, Nordhaus received it for the true cost of carbon, another example. But there's many prizes given for thinking about this, for writing about this, for very well thought through ideas, but this is not actually brought sufficiently in practice. How can we actually bring externalities into prices? So that was, something. And then why is this, kind of a challenge today, and more than ever, I would say. And, Peter, I remember we've been sitting, I think it was in Wageningen, when you told me about the risk of, the classical economic thinking. And I was kind of reflecting with you what I would want to pursue in my career. And I said, well, maybe I want to go to Harvard, or maybe I want to go to, these business schools, these institutions that teach you business, and you basically were very cautious, and you said, well, be careful. There's a certain idea very dominant, and you can be kind of affected by that idea. And this one of the key thinkers of the dominant stream of thinking in business is Friedman. Friedman is an economist, and Milton Friedman, he basically is famous for his kind of phrase, the sole purpose of business is business. And, you know, the purpose of business is to increase its profits. And this is actually something that's super ingrained into the culture, business culture, but also into business institutions, the way in which we value companies, the way in which, you know, loan-like rewards, incentives are structured. It's all about maximizing the financial returns for shareholders in the short run. It's a very successful thing, and it's successful, more successful than ever, I would say, even though some may argue that there's kind of this tipping point, and there's so many signs that, you know, the traditional way of looking at business is obsolete. I would say it's completely the opposite. Look at Shell, look at the dozens of billions of dollars of profit they made, whereas at the same time they instigate and contribute to a climatological disaster. Look at the food trading companies that make dozens of billions of profits in a context of rising hunger in the world. That's just to illustrate the kind of exploitative nature of markets, just pursuing the financial at the expense of natural, social, human, and manufactured capital is actually something that is, you know, considered success. The definition of success is that, and that is the ultimate, I would say not the only, but the ultimate cause for the kind of challenges that we see today, caused kind of driven by markets. And I want to say again, I know this is not the only cause. There's also things beyond markets that kind of instigate problems, but for sure it is one important thing. I remember Karen Armstrong as part of the Earth Charter when she brought her principles for empathy in one of the meetings we had. And this is, for example, obviously also very important. There's so many other things that are important. The Charter for Compassion, which is, I would say, very much in line with the Earth Charter. And I think the two kind of idea sets are very much interlinked. But it's just to stress, you know, I don't want to pretend that this is encompassing everything, or it's kind of exhaustive in the problem, but it's definitely an important part. If you look at the development of kind of the world in the, let's say, past more or less 200 years, you can see that there's a lot of benefit that came from the production and consumption system and from markets. In the dark line, you see the average growth of GDP per capita, and expressed in US dollars. And you see that there's actually quite an increase. And we've been, with the world economy, successful in alleviating poverty for hundreds of millions of people, and to feed so many people, which is amazing. And you see obviously a stark difference. I think the upper line is the US. The line below that is Europe. So you see that there's stark differences, but still, you know, markets are well served to an extent to alleviate people from poverty and to create development. However, you know, climate change, due to the externalities of markets, is really threatening us unprecedentedly. It's unbelievable. If you take the most recent measures of the temperature in the ocean, the scenarios that we are currently moving towards are really creating a kind of, well, very, very unlivable situation for hundreds of millions of people, beyond the people that are already suffering as we speak from the heat, from the extreme weather conditions. You also see the WWF report that is often quoted, that there's in the past 50 years, 68% of the populations of species decreased. A very striking statistic that I always find, you know, it's shivering, is the number of forced laborers, people who are enslaved in the economy. The ILO recently brought out a report that showed an increase recently, 40 million people that are currently contributing to formal and informal economies, whatever informal economies may be, through forced labor. This could be a taxi driver that, you know, carry the us in climate conferences in Qatar, for example, that have to hand in their passports, all the way to the cocoa workers who are traded as young people, you know, work with force, with machetes, kind of forced to provide labor. It's a very lucrative way of providing of business, and forcing people. There's just almost zero costs to it. So it's super competitive in a Friedman doctrine. So, and then there's also obviously the question of poverty, people who cannot get by through a full-time employment, through very hard work. It's striking, but it's true. So we are not there yet. And well, the Dutch, this is less relevant for all of you, but we are no exception to this. Here you see in blue, the broad kind of inclusive well-being, and in orange you see on the graphic the GDP, and you see a kind of a crocodile mouth, which is kind of, you see the decoupling of inclusive well-being and the GDP. There's also kind of this problem that despite our growth, we see a decrease or a flattening of well-being, and we have, you know, 230,000 working poor. We have extreme kind of inequality as well here. So yeah, we are no exception. Another kind of challenge with regards to externalities is that, yeah, at the one hand, you see that food as a very important commodity is too expensive and accessible for 3 billion people worldwide. And at the same time, and these are our calculations, we calculated for the scientific group to the United Nations, that there is a huge it's societal cost linked to food production. So for the 9,000 billion US dollars of food production and consumption, you can add 200% to cover for the natural and kind of health costs. Biodiversity loss, land use, food systems are the prime contributor to that loss of biodiversity. Water, soil, air pollution, but also health. It's a huge challenge, the health costs related to food. Hyper-processed fat, salty, and sugary food that's relatively cheap, relatively accessible, and you at the same time see obesogenic, these kind of calls obesogenic food landscapes. And in a way, there's kind of these food deserts as well, where you cannot get any fresh, unprocessed, healthy food. And if you can get it, it's super expensive. So, you know, that's what this graph represents, a 200% of the expenditures in food of social and environmental costs. So it's a huge challenge. We've also done the calculations, or the Rockefeller Foundation worked with McKinsey USA. They used our method to assess this for the United States. And there as well, you see that there's a huge external costs of the 1.1 trillion US dollars. There's 3.2 trillion cost to biodiversity, the environment, and human health. And again, livelihoods, underpayment of food workers, food systems being one of the largest, if not, I think it's the largest provider of work in the world. And the jobs are not in dignity, unfortunately. So this is kind of the externalities part. Bear with me, because I know it's heavy content. And by the way, don't hesitate to ask questions. I'll open the chat to see if there's any. I can address them during the conversation as well. Let me now go into the trend that I see in Europe. And I think, you know, there's some signs that there's also similar trends going on around the world, but you know, I'm not that hopeful actually if I see the developments. Sorry, there's some Dutch words in here, but this is in gray. You see this kind of a schematic overview of the trend of internalization. And so you see a company in gray that pursues shareholder value. You see in gray on the left the bar chart of shareholder value, which is, the value that is gained by the owners of the company, so to say, that has an impact on society in orange. And you see an actual feedback of dependency where the impact on society is increasingly becoming a dependency and an impact to the company itself, which is kind of considered internalization of those externalities. This is an interesting trend that you can observe. And there's a few drivers of this trend. I've just listed a few social costs for own account, which means there's actually real costs on the plate of companies due to the scarcity of raw materials, due to extraction of raw materials, weather damages and conflicts that are, labor strikes, for example, due to underpayment, or the kind of price volatility, because oftentimes you see that in the energy crisis in Europe, mostly, where Russia and Gazprom in particular as actually a quite exploitative and ruthless company, also causes price spikes and problems in your supply chain. So those who had a contract of Gazprom had a big additional cost to bear. So social costs come to your own account. That's not always true, but it could happen. The growing customer expectations, millennials, Gen Z, amongst others, the largest population that the world has ever seen, or largest kind of age cohort that the world has ever seen, is actually relatively digital native. They are, and obviously there's a huge digital divide. So I don't want to do injustice to all of those who are not connected to the web or to internet, but nonetheless, those who are, they are very sensitive to the truth. They want to know the, source, the origin of things. They are tolerant to a lot of information. So, there's expectations about the quality and about the ethical kind of foundations behind companies and behind products. There's an increasing number of self-regulatory frameworks. People sometimes say there's kind of too many certificates, but you also see benchmarks for environmental, social, and governance performance. And you may be critical, but it's there. There's an increasing effort to regulate yourself. Fair trade is one of the more well-known examples. Rainforest Alliance, it's product level, but there's also, for example, Dow Jones Sustainability Index, which is company level comparison. So you see increasing self-regulation, transformation risks, which means that there's fines, taxes, and kind of trading systems for example, carbon. And there's regulatory responses as well. And I will go into that in more detail, like the non-financial reporting disclosure regulation, the corporate sustainability reporting directive, but also kind of schemes that are respected and expected as well by market authorities. Within, for example, the IFRS, there is a likelihood that the ISSB, that's a standard within the kind of global accounting standard, that will kind of ask at least disclosure on climate impacts. The EU's taxonomy, I will go into that in more detail, the kind of classification for what's considered a sustainable investment and what's not. The Sustainable Development Goals, obviously it's kind of more a framework of goals, but it's nonetheless something that has been adopted by many states and kind of regulators in the world, and the Paris Climate Agreement, obviously, as well. And one of the things is that you now see a kind of increasing number of litigations. Recently, the European Court of Justice has had a case in which I think it was a mayor from France, teenagers from Portugal, and grandmothers from Switzerland, who said, this climate disaster is a risk to our health. We demand clear Paris Climate Agreement proof policies by the European governments. And there will be an actual ruling at the end of this year. And this may completely change also the climate discussion in Europe. The growing kind of ESG investments, kind of need, which you can also be skeptical about. Is it actually intentional? Is it not kind of only to the extent that the sustainability is leading to risks instead of intrinsically valuable. BlackRock, for example, the famous Larry Fink letter, basically it has shown to be a little bit, opportunistic. Recently, we've seen shareholder votes by BlackRock, State Street, and Vanguard, the largest kind of asset managers in the world, that were not so, pro-climate, actually. And, when the economy is not going well, you see that they withdraw quickly from their climate ambitions. But nonetheless, there is an increase compared to 10 years ago of conscious investment. 15% of the global assets, which is equivalent to 31,000 billion US dollars, is increasing, and also a particular asset class, impact investing, which is really intentionally pursuing impact on society, that is also increasing to more than 1 trillion, which is 1,000 billion US dollars. Governments are also chipping in. You see the beyond GDP discussion, and finally the acceleration through technology. And that is basically that, the observation, processing, storage capacity of machines are rapidly increasing, and therefore that the cost of kind of assuring sustainable production and consumption is really going down. And it's more likely that market players are incorporating this in their choices. So this is the trends. Let me look into the chat and look into a question of Tammy. Thank you, Tammy, for this question. So this is enlightening to hear. Great, thank you. I have a question. You said that the purpose of business to increase its profits. Do you think the purpose has changed recently, shifted from quantity to quality? Tammy, could you elaborate a bit what you mean with this question?
Yes, hello, Michael. Thank you so much for your presentation. So when you were introducing, I think the chapter 2 or 3 of your presentation, you shared about the purpose of business. And I think that's what was harsh in the 20th century. But throughout the past 20 years of climate change and the SDGs and ESG, do you think that we have changed the purpose of business, not beyond the increasing of profits, but thinking more about quality, not only about quantity, not increasing the GDP or profits by itself?
Thank you for that question. I don't think so. I don't think, look, I think in the days that Friedman's idea, and, there was a whole community of thinkers, including Alan Greenspan or Ayn Rand, there were positioned figures, influential figures, who really felt, that if individuals pursue their own interest, then the outcome of the collective is best, right? And that has also implications for business. Which is like, if a business pursues its own interest, the system is the outcomes of the system is best. And I think, we need to look at that also within its own time. And perhaps in those days, there were norms that were safeguarding the commons more than today. Maybe this kind of market thinking wasn't kind of diffused into culture, into the family, into kind of religious life, into all sorts of other spheres of life. And therefore there were kind of more, pressures, kind of spheres that had other logic, and kind of would, counter a little bit this dominant thinking. And I don't think we have that today. I think the kind of, culture that, business culture in particular, consumption culture, I think you see a homogenization. I think you see a dominant idea that, production and consumption is a worthwhile pursuit. It's a kind of something that you could actually you could even consider it's ontological idea that when you buy, you are. I would even go so far as saying that in many contexts, I'm not saying it's universal, it's everywhere, but in many contexts, the ontology, the philosophy of being is, if you buy something, then you are. And I think that is unprecedented in current day society. And therefore also we see a rapid increase of, profits, production and consumption worldwide. And you see also an increasing amount of oligopolies, large conglomerates of businesses that have disproportionate market power. I wish it wasn't the case, but if I look at the trends globally, I do see the opposite trend. And yeah, there is obviously a counter move. I will look into that, but yeah, for me, it's actually not happening as we speak. Sorry for being so blunt and, perhaps a little bit pessimistic about what we see. But yeah, there is actually a lot of reasons to have active hope, not passive hope. I don't like passive hope because it's kind of, it's kind of the hopium of the people, as Marx used to say about religion, right? The opium of the people is the way in which, if people are just hopeful, I don't think there's actual action. You need to have active hope, get people excited in a mode of action, and let them shape their own outcomes and also change the system. Now, what we see is that in the late 1940s, Eleanor Roosevelt, the other Eleanor that I was confused about, she had a very courageous attempt, and I think successfully so, to gather the leaders in the world around kind of norms that would be a kind of precondition for dignity. The United Nations principles for human rights, and that is something that was adopted and accepted. And you see a lot of, for example, conferences of parties, the COPs, the climate COPs, the biodiversity COPs, that have further specified what we mean with a right to a livable environment. The Paris Climate Agreement is an example of that. The Sustainable Development Goals were, simply said call it strategy of the world to meet the rights that we agreed upon so many decades ago. So it's kind of, oh wait, we have a right to be free from exploitation, from poverty. How do we get there? And what is kind of the goals to achieve that? So this is really a kind of milestone in, I would say, human civilization. And there's a lot of protocols that are connected to that. The Earth Charter is, I would say, an innovation to this. You should actually position them in this. But I think they are, interwoven in a lot of this in the first place. It's, but there's a few things missing, obviously, in the Human Rights Charter. And I think Earth Charter, should actually be used to extend the human rights principles. But, that's still an endeavor that we obviously have to undertake. But there's a rights framework in the world. It's called also soft law. From a legal perspective, it's oftentimes not actually kind of punished if you infringe upon it, but you see more and more actually stringent regulation. And this is another global overview of, for example, the right to a clean environment or to a livable climate. Here you see the emission trading systems worldwide on the left. And that is something that the World Bank counts every year or once every 2 years. And here you see that there's in blue a lot of emission trading systems in force, from China to the US. Also trading systems under development, under consideration. And this is very unique because a thing that's intangible almost is getting a price, and that is traded and becomes part of market transactions. So it's really significant kind of improvements. And also on the right, you see the human rights kind of laws, that law that Europe has voted in favor of, the corporate sustainable due diligence directive that was recently even adopted in a kind of more refined proposal. And also kind of the parliament voted in favor of that. So it's something that, gives kind of, and that basically entails, if a business infringes upon human rights, they have to undertake remediative actions, create transparency, and alleviate the infringements. And that is, for example, well, the forced labor that I just spoke about, or the underpayment or under-earning of workers in value chains. These are infringements of human rights. And in Europe, you see a trend towards, well, asking for remediative actions. In Germany, right now, there is actually a fine of 1% of the revenue of a company for large corporations if there's not undertaking, if companies are not undertaking remediative action. So that's actually quite significant changes, luckily. And so that is already promising. Also, the kind of impact economy and impact economics is an idea that the economy incorporates the impacts, as we saw through the internalization, and that then in a way, production and consumption is a means to well-being for all, and will protect and respect human rights. Here you see a visual representation of the logic that shareholder value and the short-term profit is contested by stakeholders who kind of want to see impact, want to understand what's the effect, and they are pushing the company to become more impact focused. The negative impacts are considered risks through carbon taxation. That's what I showed with the emission trading systems, but also positive impacts. If you contribute to health, then you are actually valued. So you see a lot of stakeholders vocal with this regards, and also successfully ingraining this into regulation. And then I know most about Europe. Here you see the European Commission's program to pursue a net zero economy in 2050, the package Fit for 55, which entails to be kind of have 55 to, and I think now it's actually 60% carbon reduction in 2030. And there's a lot of regulatory initiatives around this. For example, the biodiversity strategy, the detox of Europe, to get industry off the toxins that are at a large scale spread in the economy, all the way to the corporate sustainability disclosure regulation, or the CSRD, the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, the CSRD. Sorry, I confuse sometimes these abbreviations. Here you see the CSRD, that is a mandatory sustainability reporting standard, which is very interesting also from the Earth Charter's perspective, because the principles that the Earth Charter upholds are actually now required in what the companies in Europe, and there's 50,000 companies, the largest companies in Europe, are required to report on. So it's really very consistent with what the Earth Charter is pursuing and asking from the world. And this is mandatory. There's currently a that's called that's an act that is kind of a way to address this directive in itself. That is called the ESRS, the European Sustainability Reporting Standard, and that basically sets out the specific reporting standard, and that is currently under negotiation. It's called a delegated act. Sorry for again, that's kind of technical word, but the delegated act is currently revisited, or the European Commission has given kind of a response to a proposal to that. And at the beginning of 2024, in the coming 5 years, there's approximately 50,000 companies that need to incorporate social, natural, and governance impacts on their financial balance sheets, kind of in the financial report, which is very unique. It's unprecedented, and it's probably one of the more promising trends towards kind of the internalization of externalities, because it will become part of what the company presents to their investors. It's likely that at least a part of those investors will then benefit, kind of reward those companies that are superior on impact, and they will punish those who aren't. And if investors are silent, then kind of governments will hopefully speak up. then consumers will speak up, then NGOs will speak up, or then the Earth Charter will speak up, because, you know, we can now see how the performance of companies are with regards to climate, biodiversity, and many human rights. Unfortunately, what you also see is that there's fierce industrial lobby. European law, well, it starts with a Commission proposal. Then you have amendments from the Parliament, and you see here yes, obviously a meme, a joke, but you see here a model that is wearing a very nice suit. And in each phase of the development of the regulation, parts of the suit are removed. And at the end, when the member states ratify the regulation, you only have the socks and the whole suit is gone. That's obviously the risk. And we are now obviously also very vocal in the context of the CSRD. We started csrd.org. Yeah, I just found out a while ago, I obviously saw this coming, that csrd.org was for sale for $495. You know, it's a lot of money, but it was worth it to buy this. And now we started a counter movement to kind of balance a little bit the industrial forces. Macron, with his revival of the manufacturing in France, the car industry in Germany, they are very hesitant, obviously also because they foresee and they fear competition from the US, the competition from China. And they see that the US is actually doing a lot to revitalize also the manufacturing industries. And, you know, they kind of fight against transformative regulation. And at the same time, and that's what we stand for, we see that there's so many impact enterprises, a growing number of investors, as we also showed before, that truly believe that business can be a force for good, and we want to give them a voice. And we've now, I mean, we kicked this off 2 days ago. Already 95% of the responses to the Commission's proposal are Dutch. We started in the Netherlands, so we kind of need to broaden our kind of geographic focus a little bit. But, you know, we are kind of mobilizing against the corporate capture that you see at the European federal level or European level. Another trend, and that is a key trend as well, and oftentimes forgot, is the digitization. So I've shown you the kind of impact trend at Europe, and now the digitization trend, the European single access point. That is a very important trend where the Commission wants to kind of unlock financial data of all the companies in Europe, and also the ESG data. That will be the data that we just talked about, that will be reported in the coming years under the CSRD. So you will have not just that companies reported on their kind of annual reports, but it will also be through one click of a mouse accessible, or through one, what is it, Apple Glass, accessible for anyone in the market. It will be open source. And it will be in one cloud available for any entity, for any rating agency, and ultimately and inevitably also for consumers. And so you will get a lot of the norms that the Earth Charter stands for represented in the context of markets. So for example, is a company infringing upon human rights through underpayment? Then there must be some sort of interface available from, for example, a Apple Glass or your smartphone, or maybe even an e-commerce plugin that shows what that infringement is. And, you know, it will be a very relevant information point for consumer decisions, but also for investment decisions, but also for government policies. Think, for example, of impact adjusted taxation, profit taxes. So first you need to pay for all the underpayment that you caused as a company. First you need to pay for all the pollution of air, water, and soil, and then you can actually pay dividends to your shareholders. This is a very likely policy that the European member states could pursue in the context of such a radical impact information. And so there's a lot of promising stuff when it comes to this. Final kind of substantive chapter. If there's any questions, by the way, so far, please let me know, and we will have.
I have a question. Michel, Tammy asked about whether companies were going through this shift of looking more into quality versus quantity.
Yeah.
So you just unveiled many changes that are currently going on with at least within Europe in terms of forcing companies to disclose information and etc. So they're going to be forced to do this anyway. But my question is, normally companies are the ones who prepare their ESG reports. But so can't they do a little makeup and make them sound better than what they are through the ESG report? So I understand from what you just said that they are going to be disclosed in a click of a button in this future possible digitization and mechanism of transparency of company report. But if companies are the ones who prepare their reports anyway, there is a gap there of difference between the reality and what they're actually reporting. You see what I'm trying to say?
No, I fully agree. That is a risk, and that is already happening. That you have a hesitation. In the US, it's way worse than in Europe, but there's a lot of hesitation to disclose any information, and on the non-financial even more so. And indeed, there's a risk for companies of litigations. So yeah, you have a big incentive to not disclose. Why is it promising in this case? The CSRD, but also the CSDDD that I showed you before, the one that here was voted in favor by the European Parliament, that is now in a proposal phase. Why I think that is promising? Because in contrast to what we've seen in the past when it comes to corporate disclosures, this is not part of the IFRS, and IFRS is kind of governed by the capital markets, and that's the largest accountancy kind of, that's an accountancy, mostly accountancy led association that kind of develops and maintains the accountancy standard. But this is not necessarily connected to any, human rights principles. The CSRD is actually mandated by the European Commission to EFRAG, which is an association of reporting and accounting groups. It's not necessarily a kind of public institution, but they created a delegated act in a form of a proposal, and that will be a public source in a way. It's also developed in a kind of multi-stakeholder governance system. At least that it is supposed to be developed in that way. And there's also, and that makes it also quite promising, a requirement to have limited assurance by auditors. So there will be an external validator that looks into whether or not certain requirements are fulfilled. Let me give you an example of a requirement. One requirement is to have a proven kind of substantiated plan to stick within the 1.5 degrees commitment, or well below 2 degrees commitment of the Paris climate kind of convention. This is an example. You can say, well, corporates don't want to and will not disclose this, but the current theory of change is that then actually the auditor will spot that and won't give a sign-off of that actual annual report, and then, well, you have a problem, and the escalation will actually be in many European member states. You can be brought to court, and typically executives don't like that, and they will probably make sure that this information is there. But it's still a battle. Right now, we see that, for example, the corporate lobby is trying to push out obligated or mandatory climate disclosures. And they want to make it dependent on materiality, which is kind of a setback. Biodiversity improvement plans are now created voluntary instead of mandatory. The protection of freelancers and not formal or kind of non-contractual workers is kind of made voluntary. So there's quite a few things that the corporations want to push out. And in a way, that's also an interesting sign, because apparently it will actually change something. Otherwise, they wouldn't be so hesitant to adopt this package, or otherwise they wouldn't push away so much of this effort. So, and then finally, Marianne, the investors have a very strong incentive to actually get this information at the table. So the companies will disclose that. Obviously, they do their own work, but there is an auditor that checks whether this is correct or not, whether, well, it's sufficiently detailed. They will be punished by law if they create fraud, if they deliberately keep information off the books. It's a severe fraud, and executives could even end up behind bars. And investors have a strong incentive to know what they invest in, because, well, for many reasons, but one is that the European Central Bank threatens to kind of increase the cost of capital for investors if they do not provide sufficient transparency on the impacts of their kind of companies that they invest in. So there's quite it is quite a risk, but there's also quite some signs that this can actually be a game changer. I hope I gave answer to your question. Perfect. Then true prices finally, and I know we are sitting already for quite a while. Bear with me, it's a final point. This is really a movement. And yeah, as Marianne, what you said, indeed, within the Earth Charter, I was super thrilled to have, when I think there was an update of the standard, and we were obviously pushing for this agenda, and true prices is indeed part of the Sustainable Lifestyle Article 7, adopt patterns of production, consumption, and reproduction that safeguard Earth's regenerative capacities, human rights, and community well-being. Well, that's a perfect way of expressing the pursuit that we have within production and consumption, and bringing that kind of to a sustainable level. That is, well, true prices is more or less part of it. We started the supermarket now 3 years ago in a neighborhood in Amsterdam, and well, we brought the true price of products on the level of the receipt, on the level of products. This is a famous Dutch actress who opened it. Here you see a breakdown of the different elements of a true price, and on the right you see a bar of chocolate that retails for €3.19. And then there's a true price gap. That is because we infringe upon social and environmental rights. Things such as, a right to an adequate pay or a living wage, a right to be having equal pay for men and women for the same labor, or having freedom of association. And on the social side, or the environmental side, it's the pollution of air, water, soil, pollution of climate, or climate damage through carbon emissions and land use change, and many other kind of negative externalities. And if you look at the true price, then the actual cost should be 86 cents. And here you see how it's broken down. You see on the one hand, cocoa, for the milk bar, it's 57 cents. And for and that is for the cocoa. For milk, it's 26, and for sugar, it's 4 cents. And for the dark bar, you see that it's obviously no milk. You see that it is mostly cocoa. And there's quite a significant gap. This is an old report from 2018. We looked into their value chains as they kind of committed themselves to having zero social environmental cost. This is the largest chocolate bar in the Netherlands. They are fastly growing also internationally. Some of you may have heard of them, but they really shook up the kind of the chocolate sector. And obviously, for me, that was a very symbolic project that we did, because, well, as you know, what my personal drive was, it was really something. You've seen them. Yeah, exactly. In the airports in the US. I think they also are in Portland, and a few kind of relatively progressive states you can see them. But here you see that they use this information to systematically go to zero externalities within a certain time span. You can actually identify projects and also use the same language, same calculations, to see the potential improvements on the social environmental side.
Michel, a question. What is the red and the green in the chocolate bar?
Yeah, the red is the social, and the green is the environmental. And red is the underpayment and other social violations, and green is the kind of carbon emissions and land use change and use of pesticides and all sorts of stuff. And
so Tony Chocoloni are really looking at ongoing. It's an ongoing process, an aim or aspiration of Tony Chocoloni to fully decrease their externalities. Or
yeah,
is that right?
Correct. That's correct. And well, they've achieved an average living wage within a
so that
certain year.
means they're going, because there's no cocoa being produced in the Netherlands, so they're tracking down where the actual cocoa is being produced and addressing that at the farmer's level.
Correct. Yeah. And also then the milk powder. Yeah, we often look at the kind of stereotypical smallholder farmers in West Africa, but there's also a lot of milk farmers struggling, but also destroying a lot of living conditions, air pollution, for example, through nitrogen emissions and chemical processes, which is very detrimental to the kind of breathing of, for example, children around farms, for example. This is just also an underestimated externality. But indeed, they are trying to remove these externalities, and they've increased their price twice, and they also transferred more than 1.5 million euros on the basis of our calculations to their procurement, and they achieved an average living income in Ghana and the Ivory Coast. But obviously there's still people below the average and people above the average. So it's still a big challenge. Also, when you have a growing company, you add challenges to their you add challenges.
So let me ask a question still on the chocolate, because we all I like to eat chocolate too, and it's something very close to all of us, I guess. So let's say if a chocolate bar is 3 euros, and with all none of the environmental and social costs incorporated in it, right? So let's then move to this aspiration of addressing that, and that same bar now becomes the cost becomes 8 euros. So who is ready to pay that difference? Is it the company, or is it the consumer that actually buying the chocolate bar?
Good question. So we basically want to show those external costs, and we basically feel that is the necessary condition to actually ask any one of the players in the market or value chain to take their responsibility. We believe that those who can should, and mostly, well, companies that make a profit are able to absorb that gap. However, we also see that right now people point towards each other. So consumers say, why should I? Because companies make so much profit. Companies say, yeah, but our consumers don't want to go for sustainable products. Investors say, sorry, but the companies don't want to. So, there's kind of this collective action problem. And we believe that, well, as the consumer is the end market, call it gatekeeper, so to say, that they do have a power, and showing them, letting them make different choices, but also enabling them through voluntary payments is actually quite an good way to do this. So yeah, we have a lot of kind of purchase points, more than 20, and we are hopefully growing this movement just to make sure that consumers get the ability to pay the true price. And we use that to, bring it to suppliers. Obviously, Tony's also, they transferred more money, but they also added a few cents to their price. I think it's kind of everyone taking its fair share. Here you see the counter. We were then at 78,000 transactions, and we use some of the money to clean the soil and reduce the carbon emissions at the farmer side. So that's and then the farmer does its fair share, invests a little bit, the supermarkets invest a little bit, and the consumers chip in. Then we can have a brief discussion in a bit about your question of how do we make sure that not some things become so expensive that no one can ever buy bread again. It's a very important question. I just wanted to highlight like 3 slides on true profits, which is an extension of this idea. And that is basically, well, if you have kind of incorporated the social and environmental cost on the cost side, and you kind of pursue social and environmental benefits, you have kind of the concept of a true profit. So the traditional profit and loss is, as you can see on the upper left bar chart, it's kind of, well, pursuing financial profit and loss, single number. You can extend this for other stakeholders and look into their financial cost and benefits and loss. So what is the government benefiting from tax payments or losing from subsidies, for example, or how do workers in the value chain get an income, or how do workers get an income, or, you know, are in poverty. But you can also extend it on the horizontal axis. That's the second step. And that's another very important dimension to look into what's the goods, the tangible goods, manufactured good, the intellectual, the natural, social, and human kind of benefits and cost to society and nature. And well, there's all sorts of frameworks that you can then use. The donut economy, for example, of Kate Wayworth provides a framework, and this provides kind of a language to actually incorporate this in practice. Well, we've seen a huge increase of companies. We work together with Harvard in creating a standard for this, the impact-weighted accounts initiative from Harvard. We made it open source. Well, there's lots of influential faces on that slide, but it's obviously a global endeavor, and it's important to have also global implementation of this kind of impact accounting. And we now try to use this in the context of the European Commission's proposal to make sure that we actually make it quantitative, exact numbers instead of wishy-washy, you know, vague. Miriam, if it's not defined, which companies like, because then, you know, everyone claim it's sustainable. So therefore, we also kind of make sure that it's defined. You can actually have clear assurance by an external auditor to make sure it's not, you know, greenwashing or regulated greenwashing, but it's actually something that has that makes sense and that's measurable. Here you see for ABN AMRO, which is now mid-cap. They used to be a large listed company. They're now mid-cap listed bank in the Netherlands. And here you see that we looked into their biodiversity impacts, and they have kind of improved their biodiversity performance from 165 million to 95 million in 2021 from 2020.
So is this AMRO Bank?
2020. This is ABN AMRO Bank, yes.
So how did you measure that biodiversity impact of the bank investment?
So we looked into their impact through classifying their portfolio in sectors. And we looked into what is actually the social and environmental externalities connected to those sectors. And then we kind of looked into how much of the kind of their investments is in each sector. And then we kind of model what then is the likely societal costs connected to this. So this is kind of how we do it. And how do we get that data? We use, there's input-output models available on how the industries affect society. There's also life cycle analysis models available for industries, and we kind of bring data sets together. Also, World Bank data, for example, on poverty in the world for certain countries. If you source from a certain country, or you have companies that source from a certain country, you can actually make an estimate of what then is the likely poverty gap in that value chain. So it's kind of modeling of large investment portfolios. This is an example, and then this is my final slide before we can enter into discussion. That is, the purpose of business is not financial value, is not to extract. And here in yellow, you see the old kind of idea of Friedman is that if you, pursue profits, prices, returns, and GDP, you kind of turn, and then in yellow, you have social, human, natural value into financial value. And you see that in gray. And so you see kind of extraction. You extract value, societal value, and create financial value. And that is kind of the old thinking, but that is actually not, that should not be the purpose of business. The purpose of business should be to create true value that is kind of, well, stick within or pursue the goals set out in the Sustainable Development Goals that are kind of laid out in the Earth Charter, and that you kind of create regenerative business, which is that you turn the social, environmental, and human values into more social, environmental, human values, and use kind of the gray financial value as a precondition to get that. And through profits, through prices, through returns, through GDP is kind of the information system that will guide you towards that. So that is kind of the conclusion. I hope I showed you that, you know, we have a fierce battle going on. There's huge challenges. It's not a one race. The purpose of business is business. Logic is really winning at this moment, unfortunately. But there is a counterforce. And I would say Europe is, you know, so much critique that we can have on Europe, but there's also some promising packages of regulation right now, and you know there's a lot of potential for that to kind of turn the course of the market, at least the European market, and hopefully it has spillover effects to other continents and other markets in the world, and we can actually have a impact economy. That's my kind of contribution. Yeah, let's have a talk, or I don't know what
Sure.
what's your
so we are going to open for questions, and we may still have some discussions in groups, but I would like just to thank you so much for your presentation, very rich with a lot of acronyms and things going on in Europe. But I want to also say how happy I am to see how much it's going on and how much it's evolving, all of this. 20 years ago at the Johannesburg Summit in August 2002, I remember well, there was a lot of discussion about adding an item in the whole plan of implementation of post-Johannesburg, adding something about the importance of sustainability reporting that was voluntary. And there was a lot of discussion about that, or how, anyway, so in 20 years, what I'm trying to say is that I can see how much it's being done in 20 years in really making it happen. First, raising awareness on the importance of sustainability reporting, incorporating it into international instruments from the UN, but now it's landing in European Union, in the regional context. But I also want to mention that it's not, when Europe makes such change as you were describing, that is only for Europe, it's becoming mandatory, the corporate sustainability reporting mechanism within Europe. It also means that it's generating an impact in other parts of the world, because Europe is certainly one of the main markets of where Latin American, African countries want to get our products to. And if European Union is making mandatory sustainability reporting, is not only for what's happening in Europe, it's throughout the value chain of the products. So of course the impact that it may generate in the long run, actually not even in the too long run, in the short run, is quite significant. So I want to just start by praising I think what is happening. So if there's so much happening, and you sounded sometimes negative and discouraging, so for me, I have mixed feelings regarding, okay, there's so much going on, there's new policies, new instruments of sustainability reporting in Europe, a lot going on in terms of making more visible in terms of the true price of companies. But then you also sounded very sometimes not hopeful. So can you comment on that?
Yeah, thanks for that reflection, and very interesting to hear indeed. I recall those discussions a little bit later, obviously in Rio +20, for example. But yeah, that has been like, there's people like you, I suppose, in the trenches for so long already in this movement. And it is hopeful that there's now some signs of actually incorporating this into markets. And yeah, I agree that this seems to be a paradox, like, but I do see both. Like, I see we have wind in our sails, which on our ship looks super exciting because we see our flag, you know, like making so much movement, and we see that we, like, our sails are catching wind, and you know, we seem to move, but at the same time we see that the stream of the water is moving the other way. And you know, if we just position ourselves through a kind of compass, we see we move backwards. That's kind of the frustrating thing, and that is due to a few trends that are kind of the opposite. And one is yeah, there's a recent geopolitical divide. It's an inevitable trend, obviously, with a multi kind of polar world, with the kind of Asian shift, with the yeah, kind of multiple powers that are kind of keeping each other hopefully a little bit in balance. But that creates kind of a less coherent international community, and that is obviously undermining a lot of these agendas. There's obviously, America is a huge player in this, and unfortunately you see also increasing politicization there, anti-ESG, anti kind of wokeism, or kind of whatever you call it, but this idea that the progressive liberals aren't successful in pursuing whatever human rights or climate agendas at political level, that they now use backdoors in companies to pursue that agenda. And there's kind of this backlash going on. And you know, I see that in the investors community a lot, that in the past year there's a complete shift into where the BlackRocks, the State Streets, the Vanguards, the large investors, Goldmans now put their attention to. The, well, also implications of the geopolitical divide is Ukraine and what it did to global value chains. There's just other priorities now. So the geopolitical context doesn't make it very easy. Yeah, there's additional problems, such as that the planetary boundaries, the thresholds that we need to stick to, or stay below on, you know, for example, climate, but also biodiversity or water. We have surpassed many of them now, which creates some sort of irreversible, but also unpredictable acceleration of problems that we kind of observe now, the first beginning of at the climate side. We don't really know what happens when there's kind of eternal summer on the North Pole, for example, or when there's no more permanent ice in glaciers in Switzerland. Like, but it is very worrying, and yeah, that's kind of a counterforce. So what can I say? I mean, it's very, both are true. We see wind in our sails, we see stream against us, and yeah, brace for impact, but we should do what we can do.
Good. Thank you. Anyone? So let me open the floor. If anyone would like to make a comment or ask a question to Michel. Alicia, I see your camera is open. So, or Jane, anyone. I, of course, would like to ask, but I would like to first give the floor to anyone else. And I know it's late. We have some people joining us from Japan and Kenya. So I know it's late for you. So
sure.
No, I see. I just wanted to say from what I see here in Latin America, or at least Costa Rica, we are also facing some of that back current, what you were saying. And I'm wondering, I'm trying to reflect why. Why is that, you know, with all the information that we have on the climate change and feeling it actually, because this year you cannot imagine, normally June is very fresh with now, and I was just surprised today, a few days, that I was like, oh, what is happening? And but why is that? You know, in the people, politicians, this neoliberal still agendas that are trying to exploit and get profits, and we are holding. And I think as civil society, I don't know what we have to do, but I think one thing I reflecting is that we need to be more, we need to get stronger, empower civil society and request more transparency, because there's these forces that don't want the transition. I think the transition to sustainability is happening, but as always, when a revolution starts or a change in era, civilization, what I hear other people explaining is that the backlash is strong. Like some of the powers don't want things to change, and probably this is what we are seeing. So what I think is hopeful, what I feel hopeful is that I think majority of people want the change, but there's still some people in power that don't want to lose that big profits that they have, and that type of development that they're trying. So I don't know, it's not a question, but or maybe to see like what do you see as well in what can we do, the rest of us, like as consumers, civil society, organized civil society, etc., to continue this process. Sorry.
That's a good point. And I share this. We have more than 2,500 billionaires in the world, depending on what it's in asset terms, in dollar terms, depending on how you calculate. We have 56 millionaires in asset terms and dollar terms. You know, we have actually very many people who have indeed disproportionate power who will not be affected by any of this, because, you know, they have their airco-cooled penthouses. We have the mirror line of Bin Salman. He's a guy that is my age, who was born in a pile of money, who is a very influential figure because he has a lot of oil in Saudi Arabia. And he started the Mirror Line project as the kind of perfect example of a conservation effort, a sustainable effort. And he wants to convene the Winter Olympics in the desert, because they have this techno-utopian idea of sustainability, you know, net neutral carbon through carbon capture and storage, kind of industrial installations that will suck carbon out of the air and put it under the seabed. In a miraculous world, this would be somehow possible, but it's very unlikely. It's, I would say, technical dystopian. It's probably a world in which those upper groups, the rich groups, will be served by the lower groups, and, you know, they will live like gods in their penthouses with these fancy flying cabs and, you know, green oasis in, well, kind of a moon landscape. That is something that they actually actively pursue. And in Costa Rica as well, you know, we have this idea that sustainability is a green forest with blue rivers, drinkable rivers, with a beautiful sea, with lots of biodiversity, with, you know, birds flying, butterflies flying, and, you know, people having joyous outside lives. But there's also very influential and powerful places in the world and people living there who are successful in building, you know, technical driven cities in the desert, right? And they're not intimidated by 50 degrees Celsius. It's their day-to-day temperature. So, you know, could they care less? I mean, it's their normal, it's their standard. And I think we should start to take that very serious and not think of them as some sort of, you know, they're naive or they are pursuing only profits. No, that is their normal. They think that's the best interest of the world, that everyone is kind of an actor in their mirror line or an actor in their Winter Olympics in the desert. You know, we somehow indeed need to contest that. And one of the things that I feel is lacking in the civil society movement globally is their presence on the critical path of where the financial economic system is shaped. These are kind of marble buildings or marble buildings that I've been, visiting for over a decade now, where the accountancy standards are set, where the boring price principles are set, where the trade principles are made. We need to really bring a lot of the good intentions into those rooms and make sure that indeed what we count as valuable is actually representing all the voices. That includes voices of, communities, of nature, of indigenous people. We need to really make sure that they are heard in what we consider of value. And that is what we have ingrained in the accountancy system. So let's join forces and go to Brussels, where the IFRS, the accountancy standard for 40,000 companies in the world, is created, and also the GAP in the USA, where for the other part of the world, the accountancy standard for dozens of thousands of companies, the way in which they count is set, because that's the only way. Otherwise, markets will always go counter to the interest of, I would say, communities and the not so rich people.
Thank you, Michel. Anyone else would like to jump in and ask a question or make a comment? I see Jane. Please, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Miriam. Thank you, Michel, for that presentation. I think when you are speaking, I could relate very much. I'm in Kenya, East Africa.
Nice. Where in Kenya?
Kenya, in Nairobi, in okay. East Africa. Yeah. Yes.
Kenya,
I think there are a few Kenyans online also, 2 other Kenyans. As you were speaking, and I was like everybody else says, I mean, this is the direction we are all going as a world, as a country. And in Kenya, of course, there's been quite some steps towards just making sure that we are more considerate of other factors other than profitability, but just plain financial profitability. But the challenge has been, of course, in developing countries. I mean, if you look at the Maslow's hierarchy of needs, we are way below there. The majority of the people are mainly on just safety needs at the very low level, and not nowhere near self-actualization. And the gap between the rich and the poor is huge. And I mean really poor and really rich. And what makes it even worse is that the banking industry or the financial industry is big in Kenya. I mean, and so measurement of your success is really your profits. If you're a bank, if you're not making money, then you have people leaving the bank. And this is the reality on the ground. And, just changing people's mindset, transforming their minds, not to just look at profits. That's changing with the younger generation. But when you look at the people at the top and those who are running organizations are still in the older generation that believes profitability is the way to go. Bonuses are paid, based on profitability. So, the change is slow, but we are getting there. Mine is more of a comment, just to say that we are in the same situation here in Kenya as well, and trying as much as possible. The civil societies are also very strong, but they're easily drowned by the other voices. So it becomes very difficult to have that balance. But again, forums like this are really good, just in making sure, especially the leaders, and even with the Earth Charter, with the education on sustainability, and making sure that the young people have a change, a transformed mind is very important. Yeah, mine was more of a comment, I guess. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. Very valuable comment. And that's very interesting to hear, and obviously also sad to hear. And, I've worked in value chains that connect kind of Europe and the rest of the world with Kenya for over 6 years. In the horticulture sector, actually, and we've seen a lot of the challenges in the the horticulture sector in Mount Kenya region, in Lake Naivasha region, workers who indeed are really struggling to get by. Many women workers with families. They actually contribute to luxury products, flowers, for example, it's strange. You know, it's just a few cents. We calculate that for 15 cents European cents, which is, you know, it's actually not so much. I know for low income people, I always realize when you don't have money, you always seek the 15-cent type of product. So, you know, it is a lot of money, but for a majority of Dutch people, for example, or Europeans, it's something they can bear, especially when you buy roses, for example. Pay 15 cents more, ring fence that and give that to the workers that work their butt off to get these roses cut, you know, to have beans flown in or other commodities shipped in, and also fair taxes. You know, if you are a company and you use the natural resources, pay fair taxes, and that can actually make sure that there's a government that functions, is able to function, and it can assure programs for people, education, healthcare, and many other basic foundations for dignity. So yeah, these are my 2 cents.
Yeah, the challenge again with that approach of you know, that additional 50 cents or whatever amount that the ultimate buyer would be willing to give is whether it will trickle down to the people that it should go to, or the profits will be taken by the middlemen. You know, that's where the challenge is. Yeah,
that's true. That's why I said ring fence it, and there should be actual direct feedback. And indeed, there's actually, because many people say this, like there will be margin escalation, and then, you know, 15 cents will become €1.50 or so, and that will be undoable. But there's actually no evidence for that. There's actually no empirical evidence that it will always, you know, occur. It's actually, I do believe that there's good intention in the value chains, that there's, and we've seen in Uganda, for example, a horticultural grower who asked 2 cents more, and he ring fenced it. So he made sure that this will actually trickle down and gets to the workers, and those workers, they get it and then get a fund for end of year, a bonus. Or there's also tea pluckers in Malawi, a kind of a public-private partnership where you also saw quite an increase. Also Kenya tea, we've looked into there as well for Lipton, when it was still Lipton in 2013. Same story, just like it's negligible per bag of tea what you need. And if we ring fence it in a normal way, because that's how we normally treat wages, right? There's minimum wages. You cannot kind of, you know, go for the least wage. You always have to assure kind of wage negotiations are in a way ring fenced, because you have to stick to a minimum. And so that's not a new concept in market. So I do believe that's an underexploited opportunity for kind of income increase for hundreds of thousands of workers in Kenya.
Workers and farmers. I'm a coffee farmer, so I can tell you that nice. I'm really suffering. Anyway, I don't want to take too much time.
No, but that's very interesting. Yeah. Yes. Okay. That's great. Do you trade with European or buyers that or traders?
No, we take it to the. We have a kind of a coffee society where we just take the coffee, and then you wait for the payment that is really peanuts. So somebody, some middlemen in between, just make all the money. That's another story for another day. Thank you.
That's the problem.
Yeah.
Thank you for sharing.
Thank you very much. Over to you, Miriam.
Yeah, thank you so much, Jane and Michel. So a question for clarification in the true profit. So this difference in the examples you have, you have sort of shared some examples there. Who takes charge? So if there is 15 cents decided that the consumer will pay for the extra 15 cents that you just shared, that will go back to the actual person who was producing the flowers. Who will make that happen? Is it the brand that is selling the flower in the Netherlands, or is a third party that will make that 15 cent go back? It's just a question of clarification, further clarification of what are you doing and what is happening with the true price initiative.
Yeah, it's a good question. This is unfortunately a relatively under-innovated space. Like, how do we assure that this money internationally goes from one point to another? It's a very important question. It's probably one of the more important questions. Like, how do we organize cross-country, cross-continent kind of, well, equity or kind of financial equity, you know? But it's unfortunately relatively under looked at because, I don't know, cynically, yeah, I think it's still the colonial past that has shaped a lot of the international trade relations, and that is inherently kind of exploitative. So, but you know, we've done it with Tony's. There was kind of just a transfer through fair trade. Actually, fair trade is a, you know, they're relatively bottom up, and they have cooperatives, and they kind of then gather money, and that then is kind of given to the smallholder farmers. But yeah, you're right, Jane. How do we assure that the cooperatives and the people within these cooperatives do not net too much, or that this is actually then ending up at the household level to the smallholder farmer family? That is something, you know, you can have reports, you can look into the P&L of that smallholder, but we all know that the administration of a smallholder is oftentimes lacking in the first place. It's really not so easy to trace back this information. But, you know, I think it is a relatively simple challenge compared to the things we've shown to be able to do worldwide. I mean, we can bring people to the moon. We can bring people out of space in a few years through private space programs. Why can we not solve these very relatively simple, low-tech things, such as transferring cash from one place to another and making sure that we actually assure that the payment gets to the person that deserves it? You know, there's lots of technology, digital banking, apps, you know, maybe some blockchain, decentralized ledgers that we can use. We can do so much, but yeah, we do need to put our effort. There's direct giving examples. For example, we use that. We use Give Directly for a few of our projects. So that really is traceable, proven to be effective and addressing poverty. But
can you share a specific example of this direct giving project that you are working on?
Yeah, so the challenge here is that direct giving is kind of, you donate, let's say $200 to direct giving, and that is then given evenly to the poorest of the poor, right? As least possible overhead, which is good, but it's relatively it's not specifically to the coffee smallholder farmer in Kenya, for example, that actually contributed to the coffee that you drank, you know. So that's a challenge. So it's actually not specifically local. That's a challenge when you do it transnational, to really make sure, and, you know, because you have to have local farmers that are connected to the network to receive that money, for example. So you know, that is a more techie and kind of more like down the horizon type of technology. But what I said, 2 cents, that is a project that I know of that is done by a Dutch, original Dutch, but he lives in Uganda. He has plant, he kind of cultivates plants, and he supplies to supermarkets, and he takes these few cents extra to pay his workers end of year bonuses, for example, to compensate for the underpayment. So that's an example. But what I said, there's this IDH Sustainable Trade Initiative driven initiative in Malawi in tea. But yeah, unfortunately, when Lipton sold, or Unilever sold Lipton tea, the whole program was kind of, you know, put aside, it seems. So it's kind of fragile. You know, I think these things should be taken way more serious and should be as part of our, well, all of our transactions. And then I think, you know, at least we can assure living wages and living income for the international kind of value chains. I have to say, unfortunately, that most of the living wage gap, we know from a study done by an Australian researcher, that the total living wage gap is, and that's Andy Murray, that is the kind of gap between what is needed for a household to have a living that includes payment for housing, payment for food, and payment for non-food such as insurance, and what they receive, that the total gap for living wage is 750 billion US dollars per year. So that is quite significant. On the other hand, not completely out of reach, but the biggest group is workers from India, which is obviously the largest kind of country population in the world, and many people working in domestic markets. So yeah, this is not linked to trade. It's just domestic farmers or farmers working in domestic markets that do not get sufficient to get by. So yeah, it's not just trade, but I do think trade is definitely something that we need to be better at, and we need to ingrain principles that are laid out in the Earth Charter into transactions so that we assure dignity for all.
Mm-hmm. So again, if anyone has a comment or question, just raise your hand, we'll give you the floor. It seems to me, Michel, that you in the Netherlands, you are looking at of course, the challenges with your work, but also the possibilities of change. So with this wave of new instruments and new laws, new policy instruments that come from the UN that eventually land in the European Union and trigger change. But with the true impact, you're also working in the consciousness or awareness raising of the citizens in the Netherlands as consumers, conscious consumers, how to trigger change. Can you share a little bit more on the purpose of the work and where you are, what is the acupuncture point that you're working on to trigger that change in terms of expanding the consumer's consciousness?
Definitely. Ultimately, we believe you need to buy into this idea of human rights and of international kind of frameworks of dignity. If you don't, then, you will always use this for you can misuse it, right? You can abuse it. So you need to buy into the norms and principles of human rights, ideally. So the mindset should be right. Then you should have, the second thing is information. And the third thing is that there's some sort of incentives in market. So mindset, information, and incentives, that is kind of the three components that we believe are needed if it comes to kind of the consumer conscience. We see that there's three types of consumers. There's a small minority of altruists. They would do the best for the commons. And then, if they would rule the world, we would have a, like utopian world. We see a larger minority of selfish people who don't care. And we see a majority, 60% or so, and this is relatively universal for any market, of conditional cooperators. So those who would do something for the common good if they don't feel that they are the only one. So they cooperate conditional to that others also cooperate. So it's kind of conditional cooperators. And how we then bring in those three dimensions to these types of consumers. Well, I think that focusing on, the altruist and the conditional cooperators. And tragically, the marketplace is triggering the conditional cooperators to defect, to not contribute. For example, if you look at the choices in markets, those who are sensitive to norms read from the norms that they shouldn't care. What's the thing that is most dominant in supermarkets or shopping malls in Costa Rica or any place in Latin America? Unfortunately, very many large shopping malls with price advertisements, with buying stuff. It's not a perfect experimental setting. It's a setting that perpetuates the norms of buying as much as you can against the lowest price and not caring about anything but the stuff that you buy in your own interest. That is the norm that's perpetuated, and that is therefore the thing that you then pursue as a conditional cooperator. So you know, when we do these types of true price assessments, we obviously show it on shelf and, you know, kind of create this information point that this product that is more sustainable is actually cheaper than the unsustainable product. Red meat is much more expensive than a vegan burger. However, you do need to see the true price, and otherwise you kind of would go for the red meat. And so that's one, but we also really push for example, category managers and product managers. We now work with the largest retailer in the Netherlands. They're part of Ahold Delhaize, one of the top 10 largest retailers in the world. They also have Giant in the US, and they have more than 1,000 stores in the Netherlands. And no, when we talk to them, we also emphasize it's not just the consumer choices, but it's also where you position the sustainable products on the shelves, right? What is the norm? Do you have only one organic chicken or, you know, broccoli and 9 non-organic alternatives? Then the norm that you perpetuate is go for non-organic, don't care, right? So it's all about like tailoring your and what is the norms that you reveal, and being sensitive as with your interventions to the relational and kind of, yeah, the relational normative basis that most of the people are sensitive to.
Yeah, thank you so much, Michel. It seems to me that a lot of work needs still to be done in the consciousness of people. I often say that one of our biggest challenges, at least from I think what I see from the purpose of the Earth Charter, is to expand our capacity to see beyond what the food we are having on our plates, and how it's linked to people's life across the ocean, and how much was put inside the food that we are eating. But normally our eyesight is limited to just what we can see, but not what's behind it. So it seems to me that much of the work you're doing also involves that, but it's quite a challenge. Anyway, we should be closing soon. Let me ask you, Michel, if you want to share any final thoughts on the way ahead in the possibilities, looking at the challenges, but possibilities that you see in terms of what really should be taking place in terms of helping people to see the true profit beyond the profit that it's only limited to the financial profits in a short-term approach. So if we can just change people's mindset to change the narrative around what is really true profit, probably that will help to move ahead. But I am very hopeful. If we see in the last 20 years what has happened, at least at the policy level, the shift into making, not even 20 years ago, sustainability reporting was not in the agenda, making it at least the idea alive, and then making it voluntary, and now shifting to mandatory sustainability reporting. I think at least in paper, we should be celebrating this 20 years of evolving process here. But my question to you, and as your final thoughts, how do you see this moving ahead in terms of possibilities and challenges?
Clear. Yeah, I agree. We should, I would say, ideally we have some sort of, and with we, I mean the Earth Charter community, those who are inspired by it, and those, who want to pursue the principles and the norms that are laid out in it. Now, ideally we are, I think it's important to be a little bit realistic about the conflict of interest that we also have, unfortunately, with other idea systems, with other principles and norms. And then, I will never forget the Karen Armstrong session that I was participating in The Hague, with compassion. She kind of is able with And then this is very much the idea that are ingrained in the Earth Charter principles, is like with empathy and with sincere interest and with respect to to also, it's kind of respect, wanting to know the other, kind of finding a new middle together where, you know, indeed we try to show that there's people suffering from choices, that those people are similar to anyone, or there's species, sentient beings suffering from choices. You know, that we kind of are courageous enough to go that way, even though we, you know, if you are realistic and you kind of have this conflict of interest idea, that you may end up with, you know, kind of going to arms and, you know, having a fight mode. But it's very courageous to then do the most, well, the biggest fight, and that is to kind of find a hard connection and to really, you know, get to know each other's deeper selves, and, you know, to show that actually there is a better way, and everyone will benefit from, well, the principles of dignity, being able to have a life that you know, that you can actually determine the outcomes of, having fair return for the efforts you do in the economy. The choices that you make do matter, that you have a ability to responsibility, and that, you know, ultimately, and I do believe there's a specific group, and you know, that is the more influential group, the ones that you are referring to, Alicia, at the kind of more wealthy groups. I think we really need to make an appeal to them, that they, you know, are the ones with most power, as Spider-Man taught us. With great power comes great responsibility. They are the ones that have most influence. So, you know, let's invite them and work together with them to make sure that we stay within kind of a life of a planetary that is livable, a planet that's livable, and also kind of an economy that respects and protects human rights.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you, Michel, for joining us today, for being here, for contributing to this Earth Charter International Masterclass program. This session is recorded. I want to thank everyone who joined us today, despite the different time zones. And keep up the good work. I want to express also my appreciation for your investment in so many years in contributing to this change, that I think it has a lot to do with the change of mindset. And Amanda just posted there that Spider-Man quote is also one of my favorite quotes, also found in the Earth Charter. The more it's principle 2B, let's end with that, which is an invitation, a call for action, as it is in the Earth Charter. We find it's a message of hope, but also a call for action that invites us to think that the more knowledge we have and the more capacity and power we have, the more responsibility we have to contribute to the common good. So with this note, thank you so much, everyone, and especially to you, Michel, for joining us today. Bye-bye.
Bye.